Snub nose personal protection 9mm versus 327 Federal Magnum versus 357 Magnum. What I have today is our Hornady critical defense ammunition. Our 9mm is a 115 grain FTX rated at 1135 feet per second. Our 327 Federal Magnum is an 80 grain FTX rated at 1475 feet per second. And our 357 Magnum is a 125 grain FTX rated at 1500 feet per second. I believe the 9mm and the 327 are rated through 4-inch barrels, but the 357 Magnum is rated through an 8-inch barrel. Interesting test barrels they use. But what I had to test our 9mm is my Taurus 905 with a 2-inch barrel, my Ruger LCR for the 327 with a 1.875-inch barrel, in the 357 Magnum, Taurus 605 with the 2-inch barrel. So our 357 and our 9mm are almost identical revolvers, but I am using a Ruger for our 327 Federal Magnum. Almost identical barrel travel though. So we're going to see what we get with these. So I'm going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy I get at the same time. Then I'm going to do my 10% clear ballistic test. I'm going to go into plain clear ballistics to see what the best potential of those cartridges are. You know, in the past, sometimes I would not get hollow point expansion when I put fabric on my test in the front of my gel blocks there. It would clog with denim. So I could never really see what the bullets were supposed to look like expanded. So now I do a plain clear ballistic shot to see what they're supposed to look like to ensure we get expansion. Then after that, I'm going to do more of our real world simulation. So I'm going to have 4 layers of sweatshirt material on this first 3-inch piece that represents our pectoral muscle. After 3 inches of clear ballistics, we'll have a 1/4-inch medium density fiberboard right there to represent hitting ribs or sternum. That'll be more of our real world simulation. So we'll see how they compare in a plain clear ballistic shot and our real world simulation. And then I am going to shoot at the steel target to see, you know, what kind of recoil control I can get with these different cartridges, what kind of accuracy I can get on steel. So let's get started with this test. All right, I'm about 5 yards from the target. Let's see what we get with our 9mm here, rated at 1135 feet per second. Let's see how close I can get to that. 1041, 1029, 1020, 994, 939. So not too bad overall. I mean, that's about what you would expect because that's kind of equivalent to about a 3-inch semi-auto. So you're going to lose a little bit of a velocity there. Next up, we have our 327 Federal Magnum, rated at 1475. We're definitely not going to get that with this little snub nose, but let's see what we get here. How close we get to 1475. 1333, 1311, 1334, 1316, 1282. So a little bit low on that last one. I did pull one too far to the right to get a chronograph read. But you know, one thing that stands out about this is that it's a Magnum, but there's not a whole lot of recoil. There's really not much more than that 9mm. Next up, our 357 Magnum. We're rated at 1500 through an 8-inch barrel. Let's see what we get in our little snub nose here. 1227, 1273, 1293, 1243, 1315. So a really wide variance on our velocity. Honestly, not that much recoil. You know, this does get full power numbers when we go through a 4-inch barrel, but I've noticed that this load, when you put it in a short barrel, it has less recoil than most full power 357 Magnums. I think that just has to do with the fact that, you know, critical defense was designed to be a short barreled load. So even though it achieves full power in a 4-inch barrel, it has a little less recoil than typical out of a snub. So interesting. Let's hit our ballistics gel block, see how these compare. All right, first up, we're going to do our plain clear ballistics shot, just our best potential. Rounds like critical defense generally don't have an issue with clogging with denim because they have that little plug in them. So maybe a little redundant doing this, but at the same time, I do have rib simulation that I use, and that might affect, you know, how these things expand. So let's just go into our plain clear ballistics shot, 9mm, see how this does. All right. Try our 327 Federal. we'll do our 357 Magnum. Let's go take a look. All right, so pretty similar performance overall with all of these. Does look like the 9mm did bust off a little piece of that jacket going in there. Pretty similar energy dump between the 9mm and the 327. Our 357 has a little bit more energy dump. But what we're seeing is pretty good expansion overall with all of these. Pretty low on penetration though with all of these. What we got going on here with our 9mm is we have a penetration of exactly 12 inches. Sometimes camera parallax will make that look like it's further up than where my finger is, but yeah, right at about 12. I might actually say it's closer to 12 1/4, but about 12 inches. Our 327 Federal Magnum is at about 11.5 inches, so a little bit shallow there. And our 357 Magnum is right there at about 13 inches. So the only one here that kind of in some regard I guess failed is the 327 by, you know, being like a 1/2 inch less than the others, but they all did pretty similarly. All of them had pretty good similar damage in that gel. It's hard to tell them apart, to be honest. They all did pretty well. So let's put on our fabric, our sweatshirt material, put on our rib simulation, see how they compare in more of our real world simulation. This is where I appreciate the real world simulation, because, you know, those are so similar between all three of them in our plain clear ballistic shot. I'm hoping that, you know, that rib simulation will show a little bit of a difference between all these. So 9mm, let's see what this does through our real world simulation. All right, set that with our 327 Federal Magnum. Let me set that back up. We'll hit it with the 357 Magnum. All right, 357 Magnum. Let's go take a look. All right, so I'm seeing some differences here. 9mm on the bottom, 327, 357. Looks like our 327 actually had the most consistent expansion going through that MDF, but it did lower our penetration quite a bit to a level that might not be acceptable to some. But what we got going on here with our 9mm is we got a nice straight line penetration, really good damage overall. And we actually went to about 15.25 inches of penetration. So I would say in a revolver, our 9mm is quite ideal. Now with our 327 Federal, it kind of had the most energy dump in this first 3 inches here, which means it probably expanded the biggest before it hit the MDF. And because it's only an 80 grain bullet, it really lost some of its momentum there. So our track only goes to about 11.5 inches, which is pretty similar to what it got in our plain clear ballistic shot. So it's dumping a lot of energy, but there's not enough bullet mass to push it far enough. Now 357, that's odd. It angled down kind of weird. I don't really know why it did that. So our penetration will probably be technically a little more than what I'm going to quote, because it is drifting down, but you know, where it rests right now, our track goes to 16 inches of penetration. So I would say right now our 9mm and our 357 Magnum are actually, when you're talking snub nose in these lower end rounds like this, I would say our 9mm is almost as good as that 357 Magnum. Now if you go in longer barrels and you have real 357 Magnum ammo and real 9mm ammo, 9mm is not even close. But when you take rounds like this and you put them in snub nose revolvers here, Yeah, pretty similar. And this is where a lot of times people will get this idea that 9mm rivals 357 Magnum if you know, tweak them down enough, and they might look similar. Now our 327, that is really close to getting 12 inches of penetration, which is the minimum you want to get. And even going through MDF, we're almost there. And we have a little more energy dump. But as far as the energy dump goes along the whole path here, the 327 is actually lower than the other two. So even though I love 327 Federal Magnum, and I still think this is a good load, it would be way better than a 38 Special. It's not quite as good as these 9mm and 357s, just a little bit too low of bullet weight. You know, 80 grain is kind of low because typically about 100 grain is your average, and with 100 grain you typically get adequate penetration. But with this, it's a little bit low, but at the same time that does make the recoil a lot lower than that 357 Magnum. So let's take these out of the block. We'll take a close-up look at them, then I'll shoot our steel to see what kind of practical accuracy I can get with these. All right, so here's a close-up look at these bullets going through our plain gel. Here's our 9mm. Really good expansion overall, really big expansion. So I'm surprised about how big that got. Now our 327 Federal Magnum going through our plain gel, a lot smaller bullet. Looks like percentage of expansion might also be quite a bit lower as well, but still expanded pretty good. And our 357 Magnum, probably the biggest expansion. Haven't measured these yet, but probably about the biggest. But it's very similar overall size to the 9mm expansion, which makes sense because they started out pretty similar size. And when we look at our bullets going through our medium density fiberboard here, things change up a little bit with a couple of these here. These is pretty typical to get a little bit different expansion size going through a medium density fiberboard. So our 9mm here, you know, it's still expanded, but you know that size got a little bit smaller, so allowed it to penetrate a little bit more. Now 327, there's essentially no difference to that bullet going through the MDF versus the one going through the plain gel, which I find pretty interesting. And it's also, you know, these two got about the same penetration as well, MDF and no MDF, and at the same time the bullet didn't change. And that makes a lot of sense. You know, the bullet didn't change much, so it's not going to penetrate really any deeper, as where the other ones penetrated deeper because they got smaller. Here's our 357 going through our MDF. A little bit smaller than the one through the plain gel, so it penetrated a little bit deeper. I just find it very interesting how that 327 just stayed exactly the same, but the other two changed quite a bit. I don't know why that is, but we can say our 327 is a very consistent performer. I mean, it's a little bit less penetration than what we want to see, but it is a very consistent performer. Our 357 obviously did the most damage overall, but our 9mm is not far behind that. So in terms of you know, damage, it's 327, 9mm, 357, but the recoil between these two were about the same. So that's a close-up look at those. All right, 12 yards from the target, I'm just gonna get a sight picture and see what kind of recoil these things have if I try to shoot them fast. I always like the comment section when I do this, because one person will tell me, well, that's not practical shootability because you're the Revolver expert and you can shoot better than everybody. And the next person will comment, my groups are an inch. Why is your groups all over the steel when I'm just rapid firing trying to see what kind of recoil they have? I'm not trying to group slow. But anyways, I just want to get a sight picture, pop them off as fast as I think I can hit the target, see how the recoil feels for me. So 9mm. Pretty low recoil, pretty easy to control. 327 Federal, let's see how this compares. We have more recoil there, just a little bit more, but the muzzle flip is about the same. So about the same muzzle flip as the 9mm, just a tad more sharp recoil, but really it's not uncomfortable to shoot. 357, let's see what this does. I just tried to let them come back down naturally and pull that trigger, and you see what happened there. And that's why I do this. Could I hit these all in like a 3-inch circle if I fired these very slow? Yes, but just trying to see what would happen if I just kind of let them go and just let my flinches happen naturally. We can see that there's a little issue here with controlling something like this. So I thought I wanted to show that, and you saw what it was like. So let me back it up a little bit, and I'll actually aim a little bit better from a little more distance and see how these all shoot for me. All right, 40 yards from the target. Let's see what I can do with all these. I'm going to fire a double action just pretty slow and see where these go. So 9mm. All right, not too bad, but the point of impact is shifting up with this. The first few shots I aimed center mass, and those shots that I hit more center, I was aiming at the very, very bottom of that steel. So they're shifting up a little bit for some reason. I see that with a lot of semi-auto cartridges and revolvers. So it's just a thing it does. 327 Federal. Let's see what this does. Missed a couple there. I think our point of impact is shifting a little bit for me, so this is probably why I missed a couple there. Recoil wasn't that bad, but I did notice it hit the steel quite a bit harder than the 9mm, or it could just be hitting it faster. Either way, it did pretty well as far as, you know, energy impact and all that. 357 Magnum. See if I can do this. Well, I did pull that last one. I was doing pretty good until that last shot, but obviously here, if we're going to talk about all these, this is still the king when we're talking about thermal ballistics. This is going to do more damage. It's going to stop a threat faster than these other two. Now, looking at the 327 versus the 9mm, those are a lot closer, I would say, in energy and effectiveness. Now, knowing what I know about studying ballistics and real world shootings and all that stuff like that, there's neither of these rounds or any of these rounds are on stopping power charts or in any recorded data, but similar rounds with similar bullet weights, similar velocities. What it would all calculate to is that in the real world, I think the 327 would be a little more effective than the 9mm because you're energy dumping a lot of velocity and getting, you know, the penetration we got. If you look at a lot of those old school stopping power numbers, and a lot of people don't trust those, and you know, some of the methodology might be flawed, but there's a lot of data on them, and what it shows is rounds that are traveling very fast, anywhere from 1,200 to 1,500 feet per second, and stopping at about 10, 11, 12 inches in ballistics gel when they're, you know, ballistic gel tested after retrieving the real world data. Those rounds tend to be ones that are in the 90 percentile of stopping power range here. But our 9mm stuff like that, that velocity is generally something like, you know, I don't know, 80% when we're talking that type of bullet weight, penetration, energy, and all that. So honestly, I think our 327 is a little better than our 9mm. So I do think it goes from 357 to 327 to 9mm in effectiveness if you were to hit the target. Now, if we go on to, you know, overall winner, shootability, what's the easiest to shoot, you know, what did the best compared to how well it shot. As much as it pains me to say this, I'm going to say with critical defense, I think our 9mm is the better option out of all three of these. Yeah, it did everything we wanted it to do. We got as much penetration as we wanted. We got 12 inches of penetration. We could have went with a little more, but 12 inches, it got that minimum. It still energy dumped and put a lot of damage in there, yet it was pretty easy to shoot out of all three of these. So the overall choice here is our 9mm, I would say, is a little better choice in these particular cartridges. I'm not saying that 9mm is better than 357 or 327 if we, you know, got the best of the best ammo with all of these, but with our critical defense, I would say our 9mm did pretty well for what it is. I'm not going to switch to 9mm from 327 because I do carry a heavier, more powerful 327, which a 9mm in a short barrel like this couldn't even touch. But looking at all these, they're all pretty easy to shoot, to be honest. So I think Hornady did a good job with that, having the right powders to have those recoil impulses not too high. But yeah, I would say our 9mm did pretty well here. So that's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.